Welcome into Special Session. I'm Brian Schott with Utah Political Watch, and we have got a stacked show for you today. Senator Mike Lee's SAVE Act flames out. Plus, he's fundraising for other Republicans on the ballot in 2026, but Senator Lee is keeping most of the fundraising haul for himself. I'll explain that for you. My exclusive Utah Senate race ratings have been updated. We'll go over what changed and why. Kevin O'Leary admits his proposed hyperscale data center in Box Elder County, he botched the rollout, probably could have explained it better. You think? We'll talk about that. Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall gives her read on the Democratic Socialist wave that's currently running through the Democratic Party. Plus, trust Representative Ken Ivory's expertise on the Constitution at your own risk. Before we get into the show, I have a couple of favors to ask you. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the show and leave a review. It really helps more people find this independent coverage of Utah politics. And it's Utah Political Watch's second birthday. To celebrate, we're offering a special. Annual subscriptions are 20% off through the end of August. Instead of $55 a year, it's $44 a year. Just use code SECONDBIRTHDAY, 2ND birthday, all one word, at utahpolitics.news to lock in that discount and unlock subscriber-only content like those exclusive Senate and House race ratings. All right, let's get into the show. Logan asks, how's the lawsuit lately? We are waiting for a decision from the 10th Circuit. As you know, I won on appeal and my lawsuit was revived after it had been dismissed by the Utah Circuit Court. My lawsuit was revealed. A 3-judge panel unanimously revived 2 of my 5 claims. And the legislature has asked for a rehearing by the entire 10th Circuit, something that's called an en banc hearing. And so we are waiting for that decision. We filed our response to that 2 weeks ago yesterday. And my lawyer says it usually takes the 10th Circuit somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks to decide. So we're just waiting to see if the legislature wins that appeal, then we're going to have to go to a higher court, which would be the Supreme Court. But my lawyers are pretty confident that we're going to head back down to the Utah Circuit Court and have to fight this out. And as we talked about before in the past, in their filing, it certainly sounds like the legislature is threatening to get rid of media credentials altogether. I'm going to have to file another grammar request soon to see how much they've paid this outside firm. But the last that I saw, they had paid Consovoy McCarthy, not the Utah Attorney General's office, but a boutique law firm from Washington, D.C. They have paid them $428,000 so far in this lawsuit, trying to keep me from getting a press pass. Logan says, I bet you're on the edge of your seat with it being at the end of that 2 to 3 week window. I've been in this for more than a year and a half. We filed our lawsuit January 2025. So, the process just takes a while. Everything takes a while. And, I'm thankful that we won on appeal, and my lawyers are pretty confident that we're going to get sent back down to the lower court, but we shall see. I would like it to move a little bit faster than it has been, but overall, I can't complain. I've got really good lawyers. They do this all the time. They represent a lot of journalists. They're the Institute for Free Speech out of Washington, D.C., and they're representing me pro bono. If I win, their legal costs are going to have to be covered by the state, which is probably one of the reasons why they won't just give this up, because they'll have to scratch a big check to the Institute for Free Speech. It is kind of a monumental week or month it's a monumental time of year for me. I launched Utah Political Watch 2 years ago in August. And, I made a bet that I thought Utahns would want independent coverage of politics. And it turns out I was right. There are enough people who have decided to become paying subscribers, who support my work as an independent journalist, who make live streams like this possible, who make podcasts and my reporting possible. There's enough people who have stepped up to do that, I can keep going. I can keep going for a while. And that's so gratifying to me. But to be around for 2 years as a solo shop, I was doing the numbers the other day. In the 2 years since I've launched Utah Political Watch, I've written over 800 articles. That's, for one man. I don't have any corporate sponsors, zero corporate sponsors, zero billionaires writing checks, but we're still here. We're still plugging along, and people seem to be enthusiastic about the work that I'm doing. And I'm so grateful that I still get a chance to do this, because there are a lot of independent journalists out there. Now you'll see some on the right, the conservatives, talking about independent journalists like Nick Shirley and whatever. Well, they're not journalists. Those guys are propagandists. And the amount of money that's flowing in that area, flowing from the right to these ideas, is crazy. But I'm still scratching along. And, we've been here for 2 years. And God willing, we'll be here for a lot longer, continuing to report independently. So everyone who has stepped up to become a subscriber or a paying subscriber or thrown some money in the tip jar, all of this is because of you. And I am so thankful. If you're not a subscriber and you want to support what I'm doing, I'm running a special this month. It's only through the end of August. You can get 20% off a year subscription. Instead of a year being $55, it's $44, which is, obviously cheaper. And you get access to subscriber-only things like my race ratings for every Utah Senate and House race that's on the ballot this year. I just updated my Senate ratings. We'll go over that tonight, over those a little bit. You'll be able to dig into those. That's for annual subscribers only. But if you want to take advantage of that, you can get 20% off a year and support what I'm doing. You go to my website, and the code I use is apparently second birthday, all one word, 2ND birthday, all one word, and you'll get a 20% discount if you decide to become a paying subscriber to Utah Political Watch. And that's just my way of encouraging more of you to support independent journalism, support this product that I'm pretty damn proud of. I'm pretty excited that I continue to do it. And, I work really hard to make it a product that I think you guys would enjoy. So anyway, if you want to become a paying subscriber, go to utahpolitics.news. And if you enter the code second birthday, 2ND birthday, all one word, you will get 20% off a 1-year subscription to my website. And that's only good through the end of August, because we've been out here for 2 years. Logan says, I trust your coverage over any other outlet. Well, I strive to give you accurate coverage. I work pretty hard on that. There are good reporters here in Salt Lake City. There are others who are, shall we say, a little bootlicky, but for the most part, there are some good political reporters. But use your judgment. I appreciate that you like what I do. I'm thankful that you trust my coverage, because at the end of the day, that's pretty much the only currency that I have, is being trustworthy and providing this stuff for you. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, a lot of stuff on my list. So let's go through it. This is what I want to talk about tonight. SAVE Act dies. Senator Mike Lee, we're pretty much done with the SAVE Act. There's no way they're going to be able to get this implemented by the 2026 midterms. There's just no way. Didn't pass in the Senate. Senator Lee tried to force everyone to stay in Washington. He objected to adjourning. It didn't work. They didn't have a roll call vote, even though he objected. So that's pretty much dead. We're going to talk about my ratings update for the state Senate races, all of the ones on the ballot. Some of the races moved, and it's mostly because of campaign money. And some races where it looked like it could be competitive, the candidate that's been put up as a challenger to the well-funded incumbent just doesn't have any money. And that's a big difference when it comes to political races. We can talk about this a little bit. The NAACP had a filing in the lawsuit where the Department of Justice is trying to force Utah to give them their unredacted voter rolls. The DOJ has lost 21 cases. They haven't won a single one. They filed the same lawsuit against other states around the country, and they've been thrown out of court 21 times. The NAACP says, look, they're 0-21. You need to reject Utah's this lawsuit against Utah, because it's even happened in 2 courts in the 10th Circuit. New Mexico and Colorado have already been thrown out. So we can talk about that. I've got an interesting thing that Mike Lee is doing with fundraising, and he's done this before, and it's kind of slimy, but we'll explain that. Let's see. We can talk about Kevin O'Leary. He gave a huge interview to MS Now. I want to call him MSNBC, but he gave an interview to MS Now today, in which he said that, he could have done a better job selling his plan for the hyperscale data center in Box Elder County. You think? Because that didn't go well for anybody. Ask Stuart Adams. Kalshi has lost their lawsuit against Utah. If you'll remember, they preemptively sued Utah to keep them from enforcing their anti-gambling laws for their prediction markets, which essentially is gambling, but they just give it a fancy name or a rebrand. They lost that lawsuit, and they're now asking for an injunction to keep Utah from enforcing their anti-gambling laws while they appeal. We can talk about, there's an interesting thing that Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall said. She did an interview with the Deseret News, and one of the things that's really interesting me about the Deseret News is they are really flogging. They're really flogging this whole Democratic Socialist takeover of the Democratic Party. They are really digging into that, and they asked her about that, and we'll talk about some of her comments. Narcoleptic Mama says Mike Lee has spun his monumental loss as a win, which is on brand. And we also had Katie Did It saying the SAVE Act isn't dead, it's only been postponed. Well, it's been postponed, but if Democrats get control of either one of the chambers in Congress, it's not going to pass before 2028. Now, one of the things that I like to cover, one of the things I like to keep tabs on is sort of the election denier movement, because we've had some pretty prominent election deniers here in Utah, and there's been sort of a push from the far right to get the president to declare some sort of emergency and then grab powers over elections that the Constitution does not give him. And that's a definite possibility that we could see. I'll go into that a little bit this evening as well. Jeff Midgley says, I've been impressed that our lieutenant governor stood up to Trump trying to get our voter data. Yeah, we've discussed that in the last 2 live streams. And the one thing that has really sort of alarmed me is we have not heard from Governor Cox at all on this issue. He has not said a thing. He has not come out in support of his lieutenant governor, which you would expect that he would, but he has not. He hasn't given her any support. You haven't heard that from any legislative leaders, the attorney general. Nobody has given her a vote of confidence. I don't think the attorney general would, because I think they're representing her in court against the DOJ. But you would expect that other members of the Cox administration would come out and give her a vote of confidence, and they haven't done that. They haven't done that at all, which I find really, really interesting, especially after Spencer Cox spent years being anti-Trump and then turned on a dime in the summer of 2024 and endorsed Trump out of nowhere. Interesting story. I was given, I got a solicitation for an online poll conducted by Y2 Analytics. They're a local pollster. And I don't know who they were conducting it for, but it was all about data centers. A lot of questions about data centers. So somebody out there is trying to poll on this issue, and I'm hoping that they'll release those numbers. I obviously took the poll because I was nosy about what they wanted to ask, but they were asking, like, on a scale of 1 to 100, from 0 to 100, how you felt about big tech companies, data centers, AI chatbots. Do you use AI chatbots? Do you use AI for things? Do you think that AI will help humanity? Are you excited for any uses for AI? Those are the kinds of things they were asking. And they were also testing messaging, is what it felt like, because they had some, I wish I would have screenshotted them, but they had some messages from on both sides of the issue, pro data center, anti data center, and, extolling jobs on one side, and then the anti-data center messaging was, environment, water use, things along those lines, and how persuasive you found those messages. So it sounds like they might be message testing, which tells me this might be a candidate who paid for it, or a PAC, or whatever. but I'm hoping I get to see those numbers sometime. I don't know if I will, but that's what it felt like to me. I always, when someone sends me a poll to take, I always take that poll because I'm nosy and I want to find out what they're asking about. So I found that really interesting. So if the Democrats gain control of either chamber of Congress after November, and that's looking increasingly likely, but if Democrats gain control of either chamber in Congress, the SAVE Act will have to restart. If it does not get past this Congress, they'll have to start all over again and try to pass it in the House. And if the Democrats have control of the House, it ain't going nowhere. And if somehow the Democrats get control of the Senate, it really ain't going nowhere. So that's fascinating. Let's see. Elita 1486 says, I fled burning, flooded, schmutzy Utah, escaped to Washington. They're up here too, guys. Yeah, they're relatives still, no escaping toxic family. Washington is a great area. That would be someplace that I would like to move, not just because of the environment and how beautiful everything is, but I figured the farther north that I can get will stave off the effects of climate change it won't completely stave off the effects of climate change, but moving north would be a good idea to, stave it off for as long as you can, because it's just getting hotter. It's just getting hotter and hotter. I don't know if you saw this, but there was some studies just showing how much hotter it's been getting. And, the thing is, people, just because it's cold in Cleveland one day out of the year, or it's cold in Cleveland sometimes, doesn't mean that climate change is happening. It is getting hotter and hotter. This is a graphic. Let me see if I can pull this up. You should be able to see this. But this is from Climate Central. This is Utah, the recorded temperatures in Utah. And look at that. Look at how red it gets. Like the last blue, these are years, obviously, from 1895 to 2022. But blue was right here, and then it just gets warmer and warmer, and that stays about the same, but then it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. That's what I'm talking about. That's what looks, that's why this is alarming. It is scary. It is really scary. Mida19 on TikTok says, Brian McInerney, the retired state hydrologist, moved to Canada. He predicted a dystopian Utah future. Yeah, especially if the Great Salt Lake goes away, and that's going to take a lot of political courage to do something. And, I was reading something earlier this week that said if you stopped watering suburban lawns, you'd get maybe 4% of the water you would need into the Colorado River. But if you stopped alfalfa farming or you cut down on their water use, you would get it would make things a lot easier because the Colorado River is going dry. Lake Mead is close to its lowest level ever. Lake Powell is only a few feet from the point where they would have to shut down the hydroelectric generators just because there's no water. This is really, really frightening. Logan Morris says the GSL will not be saved without banning the farming. Yeah, it's going to take some very politically courageous decisions to fix this, and political courage is in such short supply. It is in really short supply. We don't see people, and it doesn't help that we have a governor who, is involved in alfalfa farming. I remember I was at one of his press conferences and tried to ask him about that, and he got really mad. I mean, that question really pissed him off. So let's talk a little bit about the SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression act. It's not, it's a voter ID bill that was pushed by Senator Mike Lee and would require people to re-register to vote, and you'd have to provide proof of citizenship. But the issue is, people you say, hey, don't you think that you should provide ID in order to vote, proof of citizenship in order to vote? And people go, yeah, they should. But what they don't understand is that what you can use as acceptable ID under the SAVE Act is severely limited. Your driver's license, there's only like 5 states that have the kind of driver's license that would allow that. There's only like 5 states. And Utah's not one of them. So the only proof of citizenship that you could provide would be either your birth certificate or your passport. Passports are expensive. They take a long time to get. Lower income people don't get passports, and they may not have access to their birth certificate. I had to get my birth certificate for something like 20 years ago. And that was an ordeal then, So this is clearly a voter suppression bill because it would, experts say it would disenfranchise 10% of the populace, especially married women. That's who it could hit the hardest, because if they have a passport and the name on their passport doesn't match the name on their birth certificate, if they got married and took their husband's name or took their spouse's name, that's a major problem. Then you have to jump through a whole bunch of more hoops. So those are the problems with the Save America Act. And also it's an unfunded mandate. It doesn't it doesn't give the states any money to implement this, and they'd have to do it in such short order. We are coming right up on the election. In fact, we're right in the middle of a 90-day cooling off period, which under the Help America, I think it's the Help America Vote Act, the one from 1993, said that within 90 days of an election, it banned systematic attempts to remove people from the voter rolls. And that's what this bill does. It removes people from the voter rolls. So we're in that 90-day period. So, you couldn't do it anyway because that's what the law says. SAVE Act, it did not pass the Senate. Senator Mike Lee was asking for a talking filibuster, meaning people would have to stay on the floor and debate until, enough people gave in to pass it. And he didn't even have enough support to get 50 votes, much less the 60 to break a filibuster. People talked about maybe nuking the filibuster, so you would only need a majority to pass the bill, and there just was no appetite for that either. So it didn't pass. It's probably not going to pass. But if you pay attention to the election denier community, there's a far-right radio host named Wayne Allen Root. He's kind of a lunatic. And he is pushing President Trump to declare some sort of national emergency. If you remember, there was sort of a draft executive order that was making the rounds in the White House last year that talked about the president issuing an executive order declaring a national emergency around elections that would allow him to take steps that the Constitution does not allow him to take. I think one of them was like hand counting of the ballots. You can't use the machines anywhere. Maybe using the National Guard to oversee the election process. Just the federal government does not have a role in the administration of elections. They're just not. The Constitution doesn't let them do that. But there is a push among the election denier community for the president to declare some sort of national emergency and then do those things that and then do those things that he's not able to do. And if you know anything about this administration, some of the stuff that they do is they do it first and then try to sort it out in the courts later. And if they do this close to the election, there might not be time to fight it out in the courts. And you have this far-right Supreme Court that pretty much lets him do anything he wants in terms of President Trump. They push back from time to time, but for the most part, they let him do whatever he wants. So that's what people are talking about now heading up into the election, declaring some sort of national emergency. If you pay attention to what is happening, the whole thing about election interference in 2020, that's the big thing that that Trump is fixated on, his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. And when he had that, 20-minute speech, whatever it was, a couple of months ago, where he said, he released a bunch of documents that he claimed were proof that China meddled in the election. But if you look at the documents, there's no proof that a single vote was changed at all or it was tampered with. It was just all propaganda, which governments have been doing, for years. We've done it for years, and governments are doing it to us now. But the story has evolved now, and somehow on the far right, they believe that the Venezuelan secret police somehow has their hooks into the American electoral system, and they've hacked into it, and they're going to rig the election against Trump, even though Trump was in charge of the federal government during the 2020 election. It was the Trump administration. But for somehow they think the all-powerful Venezuelan secret police, and that country is pretty much being run by Marco Rubio right now. But the Venezuelan secret police are the ones who are putting our elections at risk. If you're not paying attention, it's really hard to keep up with the lore on that side of the coin. But that's what they're claiming. So that's where we are in terms of the election denial crew. So the SAVE Act, it's pretty much done. The president might try to do something. They were going to try to put it into an appropriations bill. But at the point is right now, federal law prohibits any, coordinated effort to remove people from voter rolls within 90 days of an election. So they can't do it. The federal law just stops it. But, perhaps the Supreme Court will say the law doesn't say what it says in its plain language, which is what they've done to, a number of laws. So that's where we are in terms of the election. But for my money, I think it's a good thing that the Save America Act did not pass, simply because it's not a good piece of legislation. It is a vote, as I said, a voter suppression bill, and it's designed to disenfranchise people, to make it harder for people to vote, to keep people from voting completely. While we're talking about Senator Mike Lee, I don't know if you get his fundraising emails, but it's very interesting to see what a lot of them have been around, non-citizens voting in American elections, which is not happening. I think the Brennan Center analyzed like 23 million ballots from the 2016 election, and they found 30 suspected cases where a non-citizen may have voted, and they said that they deserved further investigation. I don't know if there's been any prosecutions, but 30 votes out of 23.5 million, that's like 0.0001% of all the ballots. So non-citizens are not voting in American elections. But that's one of the things he's been fundraising on. He's been talking about that. Non-citizen, that's one of the things he's been fundraising on. He talks about how the Republicans need to control the Senate because they will impeach President Trump. The House does the impeaching, and I don't think the Senate is going to get to 60 votes to remove him from office. So that's wrong. But I did get a fundraising email from him today. And what it was is he's raising money for 4 Republican Senate candidates: Ken Paxton in Texas, Barry Moore in Alabama, Harriet Hageman in Wyoming, and Ralph Norman in South Carolina. And I'm going to bring this up here. This is what this email says. Our current Senate majority cannot be taken for granted. We can't afford to lose ground in 2026. Every seat matters, and the Democrats are already lining up money to take back control. I can't stress this enough. The future of our country depends on these 4 Republicans winning their races. These conservatives need our help. And list them. Now, when you donate, okay, if you don't read the fine print, first of all, this yellow box, what it is this makes your donation recurring, a monthly recurring donations. Republicans were the first ones to do this. Democrats do it too, but that's what the yellow box is. And then the bottom one is where you can donate an additional $35 automatically. But look at this red box here where it says confirm donation split. So if you make a $35 donation, Senator Mike Lee is going to keep $33.60 of that. Barry Moore gets 35 cents. Ken Paxton gets 35 cents. Harriet Hageman gets 35 cents. Ralph Norman gets 35 cents. So you got this whole gigantic fundraising email saying Republicans need to keep control of the Senate. And if you make a donation, you're not paying attention, Senator Lee's going to keep almost $34 out of it. He's going to keep the lion's share. Say you give $100. He's going to keep $96. Each one of them will get $1. So he gets 96% of the money. He's done this before. When Herschel Walker was running for the Senate in Georgia back in 2020, Lee did the same thing. He was fundraising for him, and Lee kept most of the money, unless you change the actual allocation. But a lot of people do this, but I just think it's funny because every time Senator Lee does fundraising for other Republican candidates, he keeps most of the money. You're donating to Senator Lee, and then they get, 35 cents if you make a $35 donation. They get $1 if you make $100. and he gets 96 of it. And Lee's not even on the ballot this year. He's not on the ballot. He'd be on the ballot in 2028 if he decides to run again. But he's not on the ballot. But I find that absolutely fascinating. And it makes me chuckle. I always pay attention to how much money Senator Lee is keeping when he's fundraising for other candidates, and he always keeps the lion's share of that. It's these little things that I notice, and I think you might be interested in that. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about the NAACP. If you remember, they intervened in the lawsuit from the Department of Justice seeking Utah's unredacted voter rolls. Right now in Utah, your voter rolls, your voter information, it used to be that people could mark their voter information as private. And there were a number of people who marked their information as private. And we've gone over why they did that. But they've changed that law. If you'll remember, you probably got an email or a letter from the lieutenant governor saying the legislature changed that law this year, which made everybody's voter information public unless you had a reason to keep it private. You're a public persona, you're a police officer. If there's a court order protecting you, a restraining order that you have against someone else, you can keep your information private. And the DOJ wanted Utah's complete unredacted voter rolls. They sued them back in February for that. And that included not only everybody's name and address, it included the people who had their information that could not be released publicly under state law, but it would also have things like a partial social security number or your driver's license number, a lot of really sensitive information that the DOJ was demanding that Utah turn over to them so they could check to see if there are any non-citizens registered to vote in Utah. And if you remember, the lieutenant governor had that audit showing that, what was it, just a handful of suspected undocumented or a handful of suspected non-citizens were on the voter rolls, but it wasn't clear that they had cast a ballot. But the DOJ is trying to get their information, and the NAACP intervened in that lawsuit. They came in and said, "We want to be part of this lawsuit. We want to join the defendants, and the reason why is because turning this information over will harm our efforts to get people to register to vote. We run voter registration drives, and if they know that their information is going to be turned over to the federal government, people are going to be less willing to register to vote. It'll have a chilling effect on that." And also they argued that minority communities have been targeted by the Trump administration, and this would further put them at risk. And so they intervened in this lawsuit, and the judge let them do that. Last week, they had a filing in this lawsuit in which they pointed out that the Department of Justice has filed similar lawsuits seeking this information in 21 other states, and they've all been turned away. All of that all those lawsuits have been rejected. They've been thrown out of court. They're 0-21. We've gone over how Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson has been running a little scoreboard on social media every time they lose one of these cases. And so they were just pointing out to the judge, look, there are 21 other cases that have been thrown out almost the exact same reasons every single time. And in fact, two of the states where this lawsuit has been thrown out are part of the 10th Judicial Circuit, Colorado and New Mexico. And so they're just saying you need to take a look at all these other cases and then reject this lawsuit as well. So that's the latest on that. We're just waiting to see when this court will decide on this, or if they're going to set hearings or whatever. I suspect that this lawsuit is going to suffer the same fate that all the other ones have, because we've already got two courts in this district who have said, have thrown this out. So I would suspect that that's probably the case here in Utah. I am checking the docket every day to see if we get a new filing in this, or the judge has issued a decision. But the NAACP is pointing out that, look, they are 0-21 on this, so you should probably throw it out as well. Now, if you remember, the President Trump issued an executive order, I think last month or maybe a little bit earlier this year, ordering the USPS to not deliver mail-in ballots to people who are not on the voters list. This is one of the reasons why they're trying to get Utah's unredacted voter list, because they want to check it against some database that experts say is pretty flawed. But if you're not in that database, then you're not on the voter rolls, they remove you from the voter rolls, and then the USPS has been ordered by this executive order not to deliver mail-in ballots if the person is not on this list that the federal government wants to implement. A federal court today issued basically a nationwide injunction. It was part of a class action lawsuit, but it's a nationwide block that basically says, no, you're not going to be doing that. The USPS has to deliver these mail-in ballots. But this is just the whole assault on mail-in ballots. And Utah was, the vote by mail was extremely successful, especially in 2020 when we had the pandemic. It was hard. No one wanted to go vote in person. And so it was very easy to return your ballot by mail, and turnout went up. More people participate, which is always a good thing, unless you're part of the power structure in the state. I had one Utah lawmaker tell me that they did not like mail-in voting because it allowed less informed voters to cast a ballot, which is kind of gross if you think about it, because it's a constitutional right. Everybody can vote. A Proud Nani says, the thing is, the SAVE Act does not allow that option. Most women wouldn't have a problem finding their marriage license, except it has to be the certified copy, not the cutesy one you get the day of. Yeah, exactly. If you, like I said, if the SAVE Act were ever implemented and the only forms of proof of citizenship that are allowed are passport and birth certificate, and if the name on your passport doesn't match the birth certificate, then you need to find the certified copy of your marriage license. And that's really onerous process to have to go through. But the SAVE Act did not pass, and it's probably not going to pass, although, as I did explain, some people on the far right who are part of the election denying crowd are hoping that the president issue some sort of emergency order that would allow him to take actions that the Constitution does not allow him to have. Okay, let's move on and talk about this. Kevin O'Leary, who was, got just pilloried for his data center project up in Box Elder County. Kevin O'Leary did an interview with MS Now today in which he said he could have done a better job selling his plan for that hyperscale data center. That is an understatement, an incredible understatement, because people don't like data centers. I mean, they really don't. And it is a really impactful election issue this year. Again, ask Stuart Adams. He found out in a very, very bad way just how potent of an issue this was, because he was knocked out. And I think that the data center was probably the biggest reason why, because he was the head of the MITA board that pushed this thing through, and people were upset at the process for approving this project. But there were a couple of quotes in this interview with MS Now from Kevin O'Leary that caught my attention. One, he said, "We really screwed this up. We have not communicated what we do." Well, you didn't communicate what you did because you had the decision makers in your pocket and they were going to ram this through. You didn't need to communicate what you were going to do. And then the backlash hit. And I think some of this is also probably because he's getting sued for saying that some of the people who were against the data center were working for the Chinese. I think Kevin O'Leary is going to have to scratch a pretty big check by the time this is all done. But he said he did admit that they screwed it up and they didn't explain what they were doing. Another quote was, "I have no interest in causing an environmental disaster on my legacy. That's never going to happen. There's zero probability that's going to happen." They're claiming that this data center is not going to use as much water as other data centers do. And the problem is you're right on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. And again, the process, this was done mostly behind closed doors. If you look at the timeline, if you look at what happened, it was almost like state leaders, including President Stuart Adams, just said, hey, we want to get in the data center business. And then they went looking for someone who would back it. Like they had decided it looks like it. The logical conclusion is that it looks like they decided they wanted to get into the data center business, that they were going to do this project. And then they just went out and got O'Leary. And if you remember, Jason Chaffetz admitted that he's the guy who brought O'Leary into it because he talks with O'Leary as part of his job on Fox News. Chaffetz is trying to make that go away because, he wants to run for governor in 2028. If you watch his social media, he's spending a lot of time talking about immigration issues, really tuned in to the far right. And so, that's his first move as part of the 2028 Republican gubernatorial primary. But Kevin O'Leary said, he has no interest in causing an environmental disaster. That's never going to happen. There's zero probability that that's going to happen. You don't know. These data centers add a lot of heat. They have a lot of noise. They use a lot of water. And he's claiming it's not going to be an environmental disaster, but there was not a rigorous process to approve this project. It did not go through a rigorous project. It was like, hey, you want to build a data center? Sure. Okay, here you go. And then he just pushed it through. And that's what really upset people. People were really mad about the process, and that's what doomed Senator Adams in his reelection campaign. Well, that, and he had never actually had to campaign for his seat before, and voters didn't like him. That's part of his other problem. Voters did not like him. He never had to campaign for that seat. He was first elected to the Utah House in a special election where delegates had to decide, and then he was renominated by delegates in a safe Republican seat. And then when Greg Bell became the lieutenant governor to Gary Herbert after John Huntsman left to become the ambassador to China in the Obama administration, Gary Herbert became governor. He tapped Greg Bell to be his lieutenant governor. Greg Bell had to step down from his Senate seat, and Stuart Adams was the one picked by delegates to take over that seat. And then in every election, every subsequent election, the nomination was decided at convention. He won over enough delegates to win the nomination, and then it's a safe Republican seat, and he didn't have to campaign. This was the very first time he had to campaign. And I've talked to people. They said that it was one of the worst campaigns they have ever seen. People in that area who have worked on campaigns, who have run for office in that area, said it was just terrible. It was a really awful campaign. But that's what you should expect when you have someone who's never had to do it before, never had to actually make the case to a wider universe of voters. He had to make the case to delegates. That's it. And he got curb stomped. I mean, he lost by a very large margin. It was not close. It was not close at all. The people who were voting for not Stuart Adams were much larger. Like 2/3 of the votes were not Stuart Adams, and he got 1/3 of the vote. So he got stomped. So, there's just not a rigorous process. And now you see Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, having to do somersaults, having to backtrack to try and fix this, because this is really hurting him. This is a PR disaster. He's trying to do damage control, but I don't know if he's ever going to be able to turn around public opinion on this. And there's been a lot of reporting. If you see it, there's been a lot of really good reporting, not only here, but in other states where pushback against data centers is really becoming a potent political issue. It really is. And most of it is at the local level where the decision-making on this happens. You are seeing some states try to ban data centers, trying to put a pause on all new data center construction. And really, that's the main thing that is holding the American economy together. If you look at these AI companies, they're losing money hand over fist. They do not have a customer base for their product. They're just passing imaginary money around. Their wealth is on paper. And, I thought it was hilarious when you saw OpenAI pleading with the federal government, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, basically calling for a slowdown on AI development. Well, why are they doing that? Because they're losing a ton of money, and they don't want any more competitors to come into the market because they're getting, they're losing so much money. And at some point, the returns are people who are giving money, who are investing money, are going to stop investing money because they're realizing that the returns are not going to be worth it. That's the problem. And so it made me laugh when I heard them say that they want the federal government to now slow down on AI development, because we really need to take a breath and consider what we're doing here. These big tech has been trying to push government out of the way for years. And now, now they want the government to step in and slow things down. Why? Because they need the protection. And things are really starting to turn around on big tech. There was that lawsuit out of New Mexico against Meta about how their social media damages teenagers and developments, and it was a massive judgment against Meta, and that's just going to open the floodgates in other states. And like this could be the downfall of Meta. These lawsuits, and I have to give Governor Spencer Cox credit when he came out and identified that social media was a major problem for the developing brains of teenagers, kids. He was right. I think the way he wanted to go about banning it at first was wrong. He was trying to do things that violated the First Amendment. Their early attempts at regulating social media was, the way that they wanted to regulate social media violated the First Amendment. They finally got into a place where I think the policy is better, but he was absolutely right. And now you're seeing other countries banning social media for kids and all of the stuff that's coming out in these court cases. There was one where on Instagram, if a teenage girl deleted a selfie, they almost instantly got ads for makeup and ways to improve their looks almost instantly. That's what the algorithm was designed to do. They were essentially preying on these kids, and they just lost a huge settlement in New Mexico, and that's going to open the floodgates in other states, and they could end up owing more than the company is worth. But for years they've been moving fast and saying government needs to get out of the way. And now all of a sudden they're saying, government, please come help us. Please come help us. Please slow everything down. It's moving way too fast, and we really need to consider what is happening. Really, really, it's really kind of gross that they're doing that. But, things are turning on social media, turning on AI. There's a new wannabe, I would say, news outlet. I'm not going to say what their names are, but there's sort of a wannabe news outlet here in Utah. People aren't really paying attention to them, but I was reading one of their articles, and it was so clearly written by AI. It was just gross, because AI uses some really weird terms. It doesn't quite get it, and it just so clearly was drafted using AI. And it just made me laugh. It is just the big plagiarism machine. That's all it is. And it doesn't quite understand what it's writing. It obviously doesn't understand what it's writing. But there's so many people who are using AI for so many things, and it's just destroying schools. My wife teaches master's programs in Utah, and she's struggling with AI, trying to come up with, policies that are ethical, because kids are going to use it. People are going to use this tool. You can't ban it outright. So you got to come up with ethical ways to involve it in the classroom, because it has become such an important part of people's lives. It's also one of the reasons why we've got a literacy crisis in America. People can't read. They don't understand. There's no reading comprehension. And this started years ago when, the dumbing down of America, the rejection of expertise, but AI is just accelerating that. But I really think that things are starting to turn against big tech. And if the AI bubble bursts, which I already think we have, if you look at Google's earnings, they actually lost a bunch of money on their AI. They lost so much money on their AI, and that's what they're just funneling everything into. because everyone has to stay behind it. Everyone has to keep moving. The reason why SpaceX, when it went public, had the gigantic valuation at first is it's not because of SpaceX. They make rockets, but they don't make a profit. It's not because of X/Twitter. It's Grok. It's XAI. It is Elon Musk's Nazi chatbot. That is what is driving this insane valuation of SpaceX, where, obviously it's now down below where it debuted, but it was the reason why Elon Musk was a trillionaire for like 15 minutes before the value started to drop. People were looking at Grok, this AI product, and that's what they're hoping is going to become this $1 trillion business. That's it. There's nothing else in that. He just put a whole bunch of his other companies in there, and eventually they're probably going to put Tesla in there as well, just to unlock more capital for him. But it's just a potential of Grok. That's the only thing. And why do you think that when Minnesota passed a law that banned the non-consensual creation of AI images of people, especially young kids? Why do you think that Elon Musk's company filed a lawsuit against it? Because Grok is the only thing that might be making the money. That's it. And Grok, that's what most of the people on X use it for. They use it to create AI porn images of people. And that's the only reason why XAI was, why SpaceX was valued where it was, because people are betting on the potential of Grok. It's not the rockets. Rockets are never going to make any money. It's not Twitter. It's Grok. It's XAI. That's what it is. Elian Nutter says, $10, you're talking about the Cougar Chronicle. I'm actually not talking about the Cougar Chronicle. They're awful, but it's not the Cougar Chronicle. But that's probably a good guess, but it's not the Cougar Chronicle. But that's a good guess. Kathy says, I just listened to the Fresh Air interview with author Gil Durant about his book, The Nerd Reich, Silicon Valley, Fascism and the War on Democracy. Pretty scary. Oh, yeah, they've got some pretty crazy ideas. If you look at Peter Thiel going around and lecturing about the Antichrist, I'm not going to get into it tonight, but spend some time looking up the concept of freedom cities. Just look at that. Look at the concept of a term called freedom cities. I'm not going to go into it, but that will turn your hair white, because that is an idea being pushed by these technological oligarchs. They really want that, and they want to turn Washington, D.C. into a freedom city, which just briefly, it would turn it into an autonomous area where it would be ruled over by a CEO. The people there really wouldn't have any rights. Everything would be owned by the CEO. They want to turn Washington, D.C. into one of these freedom cities. So this is an area where they would have no regulations. They could do whatever they want. And the people who lived and worked there would be at the whim of whoever's in charge of it. And that's something that they've been pushing for a while. And when you hear President Trump, he's mentioned this. He's talked about Washington, D.C. as a freedom city. Spend some time digging into that. I wanted to look at this article from the Deseret News. I need to bring it up on Apple News. And here's a pro tip for everybody. Okay. The best news app, like the best bang for your buck, if you want to get a news, if you want an app that's going to be able to give you the news and get a paid subscription to Apple News. It's like $15 a month. But what does that get you? You get around a lot of paywalls. You can access a lot of publications, like the Washington Post is on Apple News. I don't have a subscription to the Washington Post. I can now read the Washington Post on Apple News. It is hands down the best news app. That's just my little tip to you. If you want a news app that is worth every penny, Apple News is far and away the best product out there. And their algorithm is pretty good, too. It's showing you articles that you would be interested in. You can follow a whole bunch of publications as well. Anyway, Aaron Mendenhall, Salt Lake City mayor, was interviewed by the Deseret News. This was on August 5th, so that was last week. But the Deseret News has been laser focused on this issue of Democratic Socialists taking over the Democratic Party. They're completely ignoring the far-right fascists that are taking over the Republican Party, Proud Boys, Patriot Front. Just pay no attention to that, but they are wildly focused on the Democratic Socialists. And it makes sense because you can scaremonger about it, and it's something that will rile up the rubes, But they decided to ask her about this. And she said that the Democratic Party embracing some of these progressive candidates who are Democratic Socialists, but and there's a difference between what Democratic Socialists believe and what Zoran Mamdani is pushing for. He says he's a Democratic Socialist, but the things he's doing are not mostly part of the Democratic Socialist agenda. Same thing with Al Said in Minnesota. They asked her about this, and I think she was right when she said that Democrats embracing these progressive candidates, Zoran Mamdani, Abdul El Said in Michigan, it's just a reaction to the Trump administration, the things the Trump administration is doing. She said, quote, "There's a human instinct to counterbalance extremes. And with the extremes the Trump administration is going to on almost every front, we are seeing a reactive Democratic response that is alluring to many voters." Now, the issue is, I think one of the problems for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is how close the race in Michigan was for the Democratic primary between Abdul El Said and Haley Stevens. That was extremely close. A lot of people were expecting a blowout, and it wasn't. And I think that might spell trouble for Democratic Socialist candidates or those who embrace that moniker going forward, because if you look at the voting breakdown in Michigan, and this is probably too nerdy for y'all, but I've been reading a lot of the analysis. Stevens cleaned up in the areas of the state with a very large black population. Detroit, those areas, the urban areas. And for some reason, Democratic Socialists have trouble appealing to black voters, which is the traditional base of the Democratic Party. Now, maybe they'll come home and vote for Al Said in November, now that he's a Democratic nomination. I think it was good that Stevens immediately conceded and embraced Al Said the next day. It was a nasty campaign, a really nasty campaign. But she was able to embrace him at the Unity breakfast the next morning, immediately conceded. So I think that's a good thing. But it'll be interesting to see if the African-American voters do come home and vote for him, because that has been a place where Democrats, the Democratic Socialist candidates, have really struggled. Look at what happened with Bernie Sanders when he was running for president. He did really well in Iowa. He did really well in New Hampshire. And the moment they went to Georgia and South Carolina, he hit a brick wall. Because it was a large black population in both of those states. So I think that's one of the problems that they're going to have to overcome if they're going to. That's one of the voting blocks that they need to do some work and appeal to. Back to this interview with Aaron Mendenhall. She did say this: while at once we must acknowledge and in some cases combat the actions of this administration, our policies as Democrats should not be purely reactive. If they are, we're dancing to their tune and not setting our own agenda and our own vision. I think that is a great answer. I think that's a really good answer, because the biggest driver in American politics right now is negative partisanship. People vote against something. They don't vote for something. What she's saying here is you need to put out policies. You need to propose policies that are not just a reaction to what the Trump administration is doing right now. All the horrible things that they are doing, the ways that they are trampling on people's rights and trampling on the Constitution. You need to have your own agenda. Now, you can't ignore, I don't think she's saying ignore what the Trump administration is doing. And if she is, I think she's absolutely wrong, because you can't ignore that. But I think she's absolutely right. And where you say that the policies put forward by her party should not be purely reactive, because if then you are dancing to the Republicans' tune. You're letting them set the agenda. So I thought that was really fascinating. I thought that was really interesting. But I thought it was really good answer by Aaron Mendenhall. Right now, you just got this wave of Democratic Socialists who are, the Republicans are licking their chops because they want to scream socialism and communism. They've decided that they're going to absolutely manufacture a brand new Red Scare for this election because they know that most of their voters don't know what the hell those words mean. They just know that they're supposed to be scary. You ask when next time you hear someone talking about, oh, they're socialist, they're communist, ask them to define what they're talking about. Ask them what the hell they mean. And I bet you that they cannot articulate it. I bet you they can't articulate it at all. So that's one of the things that is, that's going to be this movement is going to be a problem for Democrats for that reason, as well as the fact that Democratic Socialists trouble connecting or convincing black voters to vote for them. And, you can point, America has elected a Democratic Socialist, FDR. They elected him 4 times. He was a Democratic Socialist. So people saying that you can't do that, that's not going to happen. Well, they're absolutely wrong. Alyssa McKnighton on Instagram says they can articulate it only with the help of AI. I agree with you 100% there. Relationscapes, who's actually one of my neighbors, says Republicans could vote in the primary there. I wonder if that made an impact. Maybe they decided to vote for Haley Stevens. Again, I don't have access to that data. I'm waiting for them to do more analysis. I've just been fascinated to see how the Deseret News is 100% on board with this whole scaremongering about democratic socialism. It's almost a fixation for them, and just how Republicans are trying to manufacture a Red Scare. You saw the Utah Eagle Forum posting about it on social media, which totally on brand. And that stuff's going to work here in Utah because there is a strain of John Birch Society running through the Republican Party here. It's very strong. It's never gone away. Mike Lee's pocket constitution came from a group that's aligned with the John Birch Society. And so, and the John Birch Society is anti-communist. So that's the kind of thing that's really going to resonate with a certain segment of Republican voters here in Utah. And that's probably why we're seeing these attempts to create a new Red Scare. Last week, when the Senate was coming to an end, where they were getting to the end of their session before breaking for before going on recess until October. They're gone for the next month and a half. And there were a lot of far-right Republicans who were very upset that Senator Lee's SAVE Act was not on the agenda to be voted on. And this happened before he lost his reelection bid. Tennessee Republican Representative Andy Ogles, as you know, he lost his reelection bid last week. Well, he went on the Benny Johnson show to talk about this. And he basically said, John Thune should resign as the leader of the Senate, as the majority leader of the Senate, and let Mike Lee take over. That's a choice. If you remember, Senator Lee was removed from some of his committee assignments because he backed Rick Scott over Mitch McConnell in the leadership election. And Mitch McConnell did not like that very, very, very much. Mitch McConnell was not a fan of that. And so he hit back at Lee pretty hard and removed him from a couple of his committee assignments because he was one of the few people who was backing Rick Scott in a challenge to Mitch McConnell for leader. But Andy Ogles, who is leaving Congress because he lost his reelection bid, said that he thinks that Mike Lee should be the Senate leader. Ogles said this: Thune has had multiple choices as to which one he can get through the Senate, and so he makes his excuse of, well, he's protecting a few of his members because the SAVE Act is controversial, and they didn't have even a majority of the Republicans in the Senate who are behind it. So, if they signed up for that job, put the Dan Gubb bill on the floor, and they can vote on it, and then they can go back home to their constituents and answer those questions. There's no reason or excuse for him to be a coward, and if he's not willing to do it, he needs to step out of the way and let Mike Lee or someone like Mike Lee take over as leader and get it done. That would certainly be an interesting time to have Mike Lee as the majority leader in the Senate. Last thing I want to talk about tonight, Kalshi, the online prediction app, which is essentially sports betting, especially betting, but they get around the fact that they claim they're not betting because people buy contracts on real world events. Okay. You can buy a contract. Utah Royals are playing on Friday. And so there will be contracts to say who's going to win that game. Is it the Royals or is it their opponent? And you trade with other members. So for every yes or for every contract that is picking the Royals, there is a corresponding contract for the other team. So, and when it resolves, when the game is over, the people holding the winning contracts get the money. And Kalshi takes a little bit of a cut off the top. And that's how they claim that they are not gambling. So they claim they are not a gambling site, because what they do is these players are competing against each other. They're not competing against the House. Well, Utah has a constitutional ban on gambling. You cannot have, that's a reason why we will never have the lottery here in Utah, because it's constitutionally prohibited. You would need a constitutional amendment, and only the legislature can propose constitutional amendments. So that's why we're never going to have the lottery here. But Kalshi was worried that Utah was going to take action against them, was going to enforce their anti-gambling laws against them and ban them from operating in the state. So Kalshi filed a preemptive lawsuit seeking to block that, seeking to stop the state from enforcing their anti-gambling laws against them. That was, I think, back in February. As I'm looking back in this, yes, Kalshi sued Utah in February. It was the first state that they had filed a preemptive lawsuit against. They've done it in some other states now, but Utah was the first. And last week, the federal judge, Robert Shelby, ruled that the law, Kalshi claims that they are governed by federal law. The Commodity Exchange Act means that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, a federal commission, is the one who regulates them. And so state laws cannot preempt federal laws. And so that's why they sued. Well, Judge Robert Shelby said that's not true. Utah's gambling laws can be enforced against Kalshi. And so Kalshi is obviously going to appeal. Today they filed they filed papers in the court asking Shelby to give them an injunction, put Utah's law on hold, the anti-gambling laws on hold, while they appeal this. Because they're operating in the state, and if they don't get this injunction, they have to shut down in Utah. And there's a lot of Utah contracts. You go on there. I only do it when I'm never going to work on one of these apps. I'm never going to do anything, but you can bet on politics. You can buy, I shouldn't say betting. You can buy contracts on politics. Hell, you can even buy contracts on the weather, how much precipitation is going to be in Utah for a particular month, or what the temperature is going to be. You can buy these contracts, and then you trade back and forth, and then whoever is holding the winning contract gets paid out. But they would have to shut down in Utah. So they were asking the judge to give them a temporary injunction blocking Utah's anti-gambling laws. And they sued in federal court, so Utah's new constitutional court wouldn't come into play here. But I'll be fascinated to see how this one plays itself out, because, Kalshi's getting hit in a bunch of other states for violating gambling laws. And they're claiming that they're not gambling. It's not gambling because they're going against each other. Users are going against each other, not against the House. But they are getting hit in a bunch of other states as well. And they're claiming that, they're disrupting like Uber. But eventually they're going to be everywhere. But gambling is a real problem. and just the addictive qualities of these apps is frightening. Gabriel on YouTube says, if you bet on the weather, does praying together count as insider trading? That is flat out funny. That is hilarious. I'll make this pitch again. If you weren't here at the beginning of the show, Utah Political Watch, this month is our 2nd anniversary. I launched this website, this platform 2 years ago. And, it was a risk on my part. It was a bet that Utahns would support an independent journalism project, independent journalism platform that is not funded by corporations, that is not funded at all by a foundation, not funded by billionaires. It's funded by readers and listeners. That was what I was putting forward. Readers and listeners would be willing to support this, willing to fund this, to allow me to continue to report on politics. And I'm happy to say we're still here and we're growing. We're growing. More and more people sign up every day. I am so thankful that people are finding my journalism and finding some value in my journalism. And I'm really appreciative of it. And there's quite a few people who are now supporting the website financially, either through a monthly subscription, an annual subscription, or by throwing some money in the tip jar. And all of that money makes stuff like this live stream, my reporting, makes it all possible. And I'm very, very thankful. But we're celebrating our 2-year anniversary. When I launched this, I didn't know if we would be around for 2 years. We still are. I'm really excited. I'm excited about what the things that I want to do in the future. We just need to get more people, on board, seeing some value in this and wanting to support it. And if you are someone who does want to support it, I've got a deal for you right now. I'm offering a year subscription for 20% off. Normally a year subscription is $55. Now you can get 20% off. It's $44. Instead of $55, you get a year subscription for $44. You just have to use the code second birthday, 2ND birthday, all one word, when you sign up at utahpolicy.news. I think it's a pretty good deal. It's a pretty good deal. And you will get to see things like my Senate ratings, my exclusive ratings of every Senate and House seat on the ballot this year. I just updated my Senate ratings, and I spent a lot of time building this. This is only for annual subscribers, so you can get access to this. You can dig into everything for just $44 through the end of August. But what I've done is I've created 2 metrics for looking at these races. And I just updated them. I put in, we just got through the primaries, and I looked at, I had to analyze all of the campaign finance stuff, because money is a big part of what happens. It's not everything in politics, but it's not nothing. And as a longtime political operative said to me once, and this has stuck with me forever, the difference between having money and not having money is running the kind of campaign you want to run versus the kind of campaign you have to run. So that was the main thing driving this update. Plus, looking at what happened with the different races after the primary and who's unopposed and everything. But I updated all the Senate races. I'm working on the House races. Those will be out this week. But we moved a number of races, mostly towards the mostly towards the GOP, mostly towards GOP incumbents, for instance, or the GOP candidates. For instance, SD 18. I had that rated as a likely Republican seat. Doug Fiafia defeated Dan McKay in the primary. According to my metrics now, he is almost a lock to win that. It's going to be really hard for him. It's going to be really hard for the Democrat to win that seat. And why? Well, Fiafia has raised $58,752. I looked at what he reported in his cash on hand right before the primary, and then the rest of the money that he's raised since then. And so he's raised, between his cash on hand and the extra money he's raised, is $58,752. His Democratic opponent, A. Day Anderson, has raised $0 and has $0 cash on hand. And when you have $0 and someone has $58,000, almost $59,000, that is a really, really hard hill to overcome. So I had to move that rating from likely Republican to safe Republican. Now, I mentioned I have come up with 2 ratings, and if you are an annual subscriber, you can access these ratings. It's exclusively for them. But I came up with 2 ratings. You'll see 2 on these charts. One is called the likely outcome rating. And what that is, it's based just on the raw share of the 2-party vote that in that district. Okay, it's a raw share of the 2-party vote. A Republican or a Democratic candidate has historically won in a district. And it's not just the legislative races. I've looked at presidential races broken down by House and Senate district. I've looked at statewide races, governor, attorney general, looked at all those and plugged them in. So I looked at the typical vote share that a Republican candidate and a Democratic candidate gets in that district. And so that is the likely outcome. So like I said, in Senate District 18, it moved from likely Republican to safe Republican. That's what it moved to. That is the likely outcome. But then I created another metric called the Utah Competitiveness Index. And what this does is it measures a district's results compared to the state as a whole. Okay. And it looks at if you look at what a Republican candidate gets statewide, they usually get their baseline is around 65% of the vote. That's what a statewide Republican gets most of the time. If you average it out, it's about 65%. That is the statewide baseline for Republicans in Utah. So what it does is it measures a district against that baseline vote, and it shows which races have the potential to be competitive when compared against that. Okay. And there was one district that was really interesting. It's SD 19, and that one is with Kirk Cullimore. Okay. Based on the likely outcome, based on the traditional share of the Republican to Democratic vote in that district where Kirk Cullimore is, it's likely are. Republicans are likely to win that. But if you look at the competitiveness index, it is just Republicans R plus 0.2. That means the district traditionally performs only 0.2 of a point better than the statewide baseline average of 65%, meaning that is potentially a competitive district. That is a district that could be competitive if a number of factors fall in place. So according to the statewide competitiveness index, according to the Utah Competitiveness Index, SD 19 with Kirk Cullimore is actually a toss-up that favors the Republican candidate. A Democrat theoretically could win that seat based on all the factors and all the numbers that I put in. But one of those numbers is money. And when you look at the money factor, I really wanted to move this district to safe Republican, just based on the money gap, because Kirk Cullimore has 67 times more cash on hand than his Democratic opponent, Shanna Anderson. That's normally the kind of gap where you move a seat safe Republican. But I kept it as likely Republican for the likely outcome, because that district has consistently shown the closest numbers of any Senate race in Utah based on the historical analysis, the number of statewide elections broken down by Senate district going back a number of years. So that one has shown that, that district is competitive. It is one of the closest Senate districts based on those statewide numbers. But the fact that Cullimore has 67 times more cash on hand than the Democrat, you really have to look at it and say, it's going to be really, really tough for the Democrat to win that. Gabriel said it would be really funny if Cullimore lines up becoming the Senate president only to lose in the general election. At one point, I thought that was a possibility. Right now, I think it is not as likely just because of the cash advantage. CJ in Utah said, did I miss your review of Senate District 5? I'm not going to go down all of the Senate districts because this is data that I worked really hard on. Like, I worked on this for months, and it's only available to paying subscribers at utahpolitics.news. But I will look at Senate District 5. That is one that we think that I think, based on these numbers, can be competitive. Senate District 5 is one that could be competitive in November, just based on all the factors. If you look at Senate District 5, the likely outcome is only rated lean R, lean Republican. And the Utah Competitiveness Index, again, it is R plus 0.8. That means that this district historically has only performed 0.8% better than the statewide baseline average for a Republican candidate, which is 65%. So I've got it rated as the likely outcome lean Republican because it's a district that has voted for Republicans in the past. But under the Utah Competitiveness Index, this is a straight up toss up. This is a district that a Democrat has a hell of a chance of winning. It's not a toss up that leans either way. This is a straight up toss up. As I said, Senate District 19 is a toss up leaning towards the Republican. This one is a pure toss up. This is the one that could be a really close election come November. But again, money is going to be a really big factor. I don't think I have let's see if I can bring up that. Do I have it here? Yeah, I can tell you where it is. Right now, Jill Kofort had her cash on hand in June. The last report was $57,709, and since then she's raised another $18,000. So she has about $76,000 available. We don't know what she spent it on, but cash on hand plus money raised about $76,000. Her opponent, who won the Democratic primary, CJ Cristina Hernandez, based on how much cash on hand she had right before the primary and how much money she's raised since, she's got about $27,000. So you're looking at $76,000 to $27,000. So it could be really interesting to see how this one works. Oh, money, like I said, it's not everything, but it's a lot. So you got that for free. The rest of the numbers are available for Utah Political Watch subscribers, annual subscribers only. And right now you can get 20% off an annual subscription and see these numbers. And I'll be updating the House numbers this week as well. Just a lot of spreadsheet work in order to make that happen. But you can go to utahpolitics.news right now and look at those updated numbers. Going back to the comments on YouTube, Kathy says maybe Kalshi could use Sandal and Ivory's Sovereignty Act, refusing to comply with the EPA air quality standards using the states' rights argument. Maybe, but they're not a Utah entity. They're not here. So I can see where you're going with that. There was a huge article by the state's newsroom. I think we have an outlet here in Utah from them, and they were talking about how states are embracing federalism, how they're really pushing on that. And they talked to Ken Ivory and treated him like he's some sort of big constitutional expert, even though he works with, he teaches constitution classes with a guy named Rick Green, who calls himself America's Constitution Coach. But that whole organization is really Christian nationalists. It's a bunch of Christian nationalists who are teaching biblical citizenship. And Ken Ivory teaches a biblical citizenship class up at the Capitol during the legislative session. Like, he uses Capitol facilities to host the class. So I wouldn't treat him as an expert on the Constitution. He's a self-proclaimed expert on the Constitution, but they platformed him, and I thought that was probably the wrong move, but they probably don't know his background. But yes, Ken Ivory works with this group, America's Constitution Coach, Rick Green. Listen to Ken Ivory's expertise on the Constitution at your own risk. If you want to talk about a hybrid of the John Birch Society and mix that in with Christian nationalism, that's what you're gonna get. And they've got that federalism commission up at the up at the legislature. And, one of the members is a woman we've talked about before, Jen Brown. And I reported last year that she actually appointed a neo-Nazi to her group. one of the to a leadership position in her group, her organization, Utah Citizens for the Constitution. He's not there anymore after I pointed out that this guy was a neo-Nazi. But yeah, so these are the people that you're dealing with when you talk about that.